Welcome to But Is It Feminist, the podcast that supports women's rights and women's wrongs. I am your host, Amanda Hernandez, sociologist by training, hater by nature. And forged in the fires of hateration alongside me is my dear friend, my sister, my comrade, fellow sociologist, Hannah Evans. Hannah earned her PhD in sociology at Baylor University and currently is a research associate at Springtide Research. Her work there focuses on the experiences of young people and religion, faith, spirituality. And today we are going to have a conversation about parenting and the ways that parenthood can be feminist. I have so many things to say, so many thoughts, but before we dive in, I want Hannah to introduce yourself. Hannah, thank you for being here, and please tell us about yourself.
Thank you so much. I'm very excited to be here on this amazing podcast. You left off that I'm also a parent, which I think is probably the most relevant thing I could say.
I was saving it. I wanted to bury the lead.
Yeah. I have a 4-year-old and I'm currently 32 weeks pregnant as of today. Very exciting. And before that, related to parenting, I would say that even when I was younger, prior to becoming a parent, caring for, being a caregiver for children was something that I really loved and cared about. I grew up doing foster care at home as a teen, and that was something that I was really pushing my parents to do. Parenthood I love, and I feel very proud to be a parent, but I feel more complicated about motherhood. Thing that I was thinking about going into this conversation, just the many ways that motherhood can feel restrictive or limiting in our current culture, or the ways that people put you into a set of binary or stereotypical things about your personality or what you value. And so I think that that's something I've been on my own journey of figuring out how I feel about it and how to express motherhood in a way that feels authentic to me, which is something that I think is probably a lifelong journey, but feels very, like at this earlier stage of parenthood that I'm in, feels particularly pressing to figure out. So those are some of the important things. And I've also been married to my partner, Logan, for almost 8 years, and we've been together 11 years, I think.
I love all that. Tell me something about you that is not related to your parenthood.
Okay. Excellent. Love that. When I'm not working, because I feel like a lot of times it's either just work or parenthood, but there's like a whole third category, I think, of things that I love to do that are not those things. I love to dance. I go to a weekly dance class that is very important to me.
It on Instagram, and I want to thank you for your service.
It's important to me to post about things that make me feel happy. I ended up starting like a book Instagram account for that reason. I was just like, I just want to post silly stuff on the internet and not take everything too seriously and just like have my little book reviews. And so that's my other big thing. I really love to read. I read mostly fiction, but probably about a quarter, a third nonfiction. And I really am a big nerd about books. So I'd say that's a big thing. We both say as we have our bookshelves behind us.
I was just going to make a joke about like, shocker, they both read books.
Yeah, who would have thought? Who would have thought two sociologists would read?
Wild behavior. Although
there are a lot of sociologists who don't read. Now that I'm saying this out loud, I'm realizing maybe that's a false assumption, actually.
And I'm begging them to read a book. I'm begging.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. So you said so many interesting things, and I really want to get into them. But before we start talking about parenthood and motherhood, I'm wondering if you can tell us a bit about how you define feminism and how you came to think of yourself or identify as a feminist.
I have always kind of shied away from defining feminism, I think for two reasons. One, because I'm pretty happy to let that be your territory. That's
Girl, I
one
don't know. Let me ask my friend Amanda.
That's right. That's right. I think one of the things about that's funny about how both of us were formed as sociologists so closely with each other in grad school is that there are areas that are gaps in my knowledge that I've just been like, well, Amanda knows that. So
I don't need to take up
I don't need to know that. Yeah. I can just ask if I need that later. Keeping track of what I know and also what you know as part of my internal library. But I also think there's a part of me that works with the part of me that has been trained working with young people to not define things intentionally. So a lot of qualitative work with children and youth really encourages is very strong about don't come into those conversations defining for the young person what that means and let them define what it means to them. And so in general, I would say I often am in conversations with a 14, 15, 16-year-old where I'll ask them a question. They'll be like, well, what do you mean by that? And I'll be like, well, what do you think I mean by that? And immediately back off of it because that's so important when you're talking to teenagers, to be like, tell me what you think that means. So in general, I'm so hesitant to define stuff, I think, because I'm very open to whatever that means to the person who holds it or claims it. And so feminism is a general definition would be just the people who identify as feminist. I don't know that I have one cohesive, this is what feminism is. I do think that there are feminisms, plural, which is, I know, a bigger part of the literature on this, which I'm not super extensively read up on. But there are different kinds of feminisms, like white feminism, intersectional feminism, trans exclusionary, radical feminism, lots of different kinds of feminisms. So I would say that the feminism, the type of feminism that speaks the most to me is probably intersectional feminism, in part because I don't at this moment in my life consider myself a feminist first. I would consider myself maybe anti-capitalist first, and then the gender dynamics that sit underneath that, along with the racial dynamics and things like that, all go under that umbrella. But I really don't think at this moment in my life gender is the defining movement for me in terms of the way that I think about or move through the world at this moment in time. It is important to me, but it's not, and it's important to how I experience the world as a woman, but it's not necessarily the way I fundamentally think of society being structured. I think it's a component of capitalism in a lot of ways. And so intersectional feminism to me speaks to these different moving parts of society, like capitalism, racism, anti-trans, transphobia, homophobia, ableism, all these different parts of society that need to intersect with each other and require solidarity along things other than just gender. I've become increasingly disillusioned by middle class feminists and upper class feminists and how gender is the only solidarity that they're capable of, and lack an imagination for class solidarity and racial solidarity and solidarity with queer people that I think is really important to my own feminism. And so I think those things are all very interconnected.
For someone who wanted to demur and be like, I don't know, what do you think? You have a pretty well articulated idea there.
It's come from the years of people thinking I'm a gender scholar. Yeah. And I am, I think I have been a woman in the world thinking about society for many years. And I think that this is, and also because I've spent so much time thinking about reading about these other issues, I think they're all very interconnected. And so it's a developed web of thought rather than just one particular issue.
Where did you encounter the idea of feminism for the first time?
Oh, well, this I'm sure will come up since it hasn't already, it's going to. But I was homeschooled. I was raised in a very conservative evangelical community. And so feminism was almost always a derogatory term for most of my experience of it. But I really didn't hear about it much at all, I would say. My Even though I grew up in that community, I would say my mom and my grandmother were both fairly gender progressive,
Mm,
in terms of their beliefs about the importance of me having a career and income outside of my partner was always really important to both of them. Um, and they always wanted me to have my own aspirations in life beyond getting married. My mom wasn't opposed to me getting married, but certainly wasn't thrilled at the thought of me just graduating college and getting married and being done. She had more ambition in her own life, and I think, like, without her calling that feminist, I do think that was very feminist in, like, a simplistic maybe kind of way, but
mm,
it was still important in that particular community where I knew a lot of girls my age who only aspired to being wives and mothers, to have my own mother say there is more worth aspiring to in life. And for her to really value my own education for the sake of my own education and not prioritizing my brother, um, and things like that, when I think other people and other families were doing that, other families we knew.
yeah.
Um, but I don't think I would have self-identified as a feminist until I was probably 18 or 19. Somewhere in my late teens, I don't remember exactly where, I found this website called the Good Women Project, which was very, like, this would have predated Sarah Bessey's book, Jesus Feminist. So this would have
Okay.
been before that book even existed, but it was kind of a pre lead up to that type of feminism. So, like, it was a blog. It was a series of blogs, and it was a bunch of people who would write on this website, and they were talking about, like, gender and sexuality and sex and virginity and all of these ways that were taboo where I was
Mm,
growing up, and basically saying, like, you can be a Christian and masturbate. You can be a Christian and want to have sex. You can be a Christian and, they probably talked about porn addiction, heavy air quotes.
of
Um,
course.
but because, there's limits. But it was a really great gateway, I would say, for me into understanding more about, like, what feminism actually is. Um, and that there's this whole world of, like, sex education that was a huge part of their work that was just fundamentally good, I think, and needed for people like me who were raised in a community where I didn't get any of that information.
Yeah.
Um, and then going from that to sort of like the Sarah Bessey Jesus feminist. Again, like, I don't I think those things are needed stepping stones for a lot of people like me, but I don't think that's a good place to stop on your journey. And I think a lot of people do stop there. Um but I think that as I've moved into further and further, more and more progressive and leftist spaces and values, my relationship to identifying as a feminist now has become more complicated, in part because of the watering down of feminism that I feel like has taken place
Mm.
in a lot of spaces and in conversations where I'm not a liberal feminist. And I think that I don't have much in common with people who self-identify that way at this moment in my life. Like, I don't really actually think we have that many shared values. They're interested in voting, I'm interested in communism. And so, like, those
I'm
are
not
just
like the other girl.
and so people who are focused on those types of things, I are just in a different place. And so, I don't always feel as confident now actually identifying as feminist the way that I did more proudly identify as feminist in, like, 2012, when I was at the beginning of that journey.
Yeah. So I've told this story, like, on other episodes and in other spaces, but part of my own personal story of becoming feminist was me becoming a parent really young. And so I had Ethan when I was 21, and at the time I didn't really have like plans at all beyond that. Um, but I left his dad and ended up being like a single parent, single mom during that time, and ended up going to school. And I remember sitting in my intro to women's studies class and having like there was a class discussion of like, could mothers be feminist? And I think I probably was the only parent in the room when we were having that conversation. And this was not like something I felt super comfortable going into spaces and being like, I was like, I usually just didn't say anything. I tend to observe situations before I jump in. Um, but there's this one person in that class who would always say the wackiest things. She was very proud to say that she was going to go work for Border Patrol. Very, very wacky lady. Anyway, she went on to say something to the effect of like, she didn't want to be feminist. She couldn't be a feminist because she wanted to have it all. She was like, I want the white picket fence. I want a husband. I want kids. So I can't be feminist. And I remember in that moment being like, you're stupid. Like, I was just like, that's dumb. That's the extent of my critical analysis. But I jumped into the conversation and I was like, well, I have a kid. Like, I have a boy and I am feminist because I'm a mother. Like, that doesn't prohibit me from doing that. And so even at that time, I was still very much like baby feminist. But in that moment, I was thinking about two things, which was that I recognize that people often view motherhood as if you're doing it correctly, if you're doing it traditionally, that's contradictory to feminism.
Mhm.
And I thought that was bullshit. And I still do think it's bullshit. But I'm wondering if you can just build off of that for me. What was I picking up on, even in that early consciousness, that I was like, that's not right?
Yeah, yeah. Well, first, I want to back up a little bit and just say, for the record, that if you're proudly saying you're going to go work for ICE or Border Patrol, turn off this podcast and seek help.
Stop. Get help.
That's right.
Yeah.
You should be embarrassed. Have a sense of shame,
I have made
please.
similar PSAs on previous episodes about no turfs. And
Mm.
now, for the record, thank you, Dr. Evans. No
Yeah,
ICE,
no ICE agents.
no Border Patrol.
No.
Abolition now.
Get off this call and
Get off the
talk
call.
to a therapist.
A trauma-informed therapist. Okay, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
But the other thing I wanted to say is that I feel like I really vividly remember when I was trying to decide when to have kids and what that was going to look like, and the conversations that you and I had during that time were just like so helpful for me and like really clarifying in terms of this dilemma, which I would love to say, oh, I'm so enlightened, this is ridiculous, but there's so much language on the internet. I still see it all the time about how it's selfish to have kids in 2025, and if you're having kids, you're a part of the problem. And I was really self-conscious about that. Like, will I be seen as, less feminist for choosing to have kids because it's seen as like the selfish option by a lot of people now, or that it's, that it's reinforcing the systems that we exist in by choosing to that somehow having kids is like participating in the system as a
Yeah.
woman, that you're like conceding to it in some way. And the conversations I had with you were some of the most impactful, I think, in terms of deciding like, no, it is okay that like I want to have kids and that I want to have those relationships and be a part of the world and engaging the world through that way specifically. And I think
What
this
did
is
I
sort of,
say?
I'm trying to remember what exactly we said. Like, I remember parenthood and, like, being a parent is an opportunity for, like, joy, and
Mm-hmm.
that, like, it's okay to do things because they bring you joy and to make choices that bring you joy, like, in your life, which I think is something I, in general, feel insecure about. Like, if something's just gonna make me happy and there's not, like, another, like, societal benefit, then, like, is it good enough reason to do it? And I think that, I do think there's other societal benefits to having children that are liberatory, so that I definitely wanna acknowledge and talk about. But I think also is important to me to be able to say, like, it will m it will be a joyful thing to have this experience, and that is part of why I want to have that. And also, like, be a part of, healing the world in this way, because I also think that there isn't really a revolution without children,
Yeah.
and that's something that I've become increasingly convinced of since becoming a parent, but before becoming a parent was a little bit more nervous about that, and so our conversations were really helpful for me, and I think about them a lot when I'm talking now to my other friends who are like, "I don't know if I should have kids, or I really wanna have kids, but I'm worried about the state of the world." It's like, yeah, there's we have been in a society that has been unstable for much longer than we realize, and bringing kids into the world is can be a bunch of things. It can be selfish, it can be selfless, it can be good, it can be bad. Like, it depends so much on the person and the reasons you're doing it, and so many factors. I wouldn't say it's always good and everyone should do it. um, but I think that if it's something that you're really committed to, and you know the challenges, and you're looking at it with your eyes wide open and going, this is a way I want to be a part of doing the work in the world, then I think that, it can be a really healing, restorative experience, which it has been for me. So I think that's sort of the flip side of what she's talking about here, because I know, like,
Yeah.
in your example, she's saying, "I can't be a feminist because I want these things." And I'm talking more about people who are already feminist, who are like, I want to have kids, but I feel like I can't, or else I won't be a feminist anymore, or, like, will lose my feminist card." um, which I think is just this is a false binary, and I think that false binary is created by capitalism and racism. It always comes back to that.
Uh-huh.
Um, to think about some of the, like, concepts you talk about in your book, like these binaries that are created by, like, white middle class feminism that are like, you can either be this or this, um, is inherently destructive. And I also
Mhm.
think, to that point, there's so many examples of queer, Black feminists who talk openly about motherhood as an important part of their feminism. I also know that as a society, we tend to strip women of color of
Mhm.
this getting to be experienced as mother or perceived as mother, whereas
Yeah.
for white women, it's this Madonna motherhood that is
Yeah.
ascribed to them, and so there's a very loaded racial element to who it gets to be a mother and who doesn't, that I think is important to acknowledge here. And so I'm existing in this very white middle class question of, but will people still think I'm a feminist if I have kids? And I'm very aware of that. Um, and I also think there's like a middle class, like, white feminist inverse of this, which is that, like, it's cool to hate kids. That,
Mm.
like, I see on the internet a lot,
Yeah.
on, like, old school Twitter had a lot of it. I don't know how much people post on Twitter about this anymore, because I'm not on Twitter anymore. But it was very common in, like, 2018, 2019, 2020 to see people talking about how feminist it is to dislike children, and I think that's extremely ridiculous.
In my
It's
head,
not cool to
all I
dislike
picture
that
is,
way.
like, the throw up emoji, the
Yeah,
green one.
yeah, yeah, I feel like I need to state for the record, it's not cool or feminist to dislike children. It's not progressive, it's not radical. Society as a whole does not like children. So, to contribute to that with your own baggage about why you don't like kids because you feel like they've been pushed on you, or you didn't like the way that you had to move through the world as a child, whatever, is not actually a healthy way to think about or interact with children. So if you're one of those people, don't do that. Stop being a part of the problem.
Stop.
I also know that there's a lot of women, white women now, who are having kids, who then are pushing off care work, and I don't mean that in like hiring a daycare provider, but like because people have to do that if they have to go to work. That's just part of society right now. But also like are choosing to homeschool, or like, you know, there's a lot of like class privilege very entwined with like performances of what healthy parenting or like good motherhood looks like now, that I think are very complex.
Do you mean like the homesteading trad wife stuff?
Yeah.
Okay,
It's
okay.
connected. So it's connected to the trad wife stuff. Like they all homeschool their kids. That feels very connected. And I say this as someone who was homeschooled, but not for these reasons. Like this was I think that like people who are homeschooling now are doing it in distinctly like post social media world in a way that was very, very different for homeschooling pre-social media. Like my mom, we did not have an aesthetic childhood. I did not have we did not have like pretty painted wall. Like our walls were covered in crayon for years, like until my mom finally hired somebody's teenage son to paint our house yellow. um, and so it was not aesthetic in any way, and now it feels like homeschooling is a performance in a lot of ways, at least the way I see it on social media. It's a performance of a certain type of mothering, a certain type of class status, a certain type of whiteness that I think is important to acknowledge.
Yeah.
I think there's some real and legitimate critiques and concerns about the school system. I don't think you can be a sociologist of youth and not be aware of like the way that prison interacts and the carceral state interacts with schooling. Those things are, and of course, not to mention like mass shootings, things like that take place in school. Those are real issues. That being said, I think there are some people who are homeschooling like not for those reasons, but are homeschooling in order to like preserve this like white middle class experience for their child that I think should be interrogated more.
Fascinating. I never thought about it
Yeah.
in that way. That's fascinating. It makes total
I think I'm
sense.
so aware of it because I was homeschooled.
Yeah, yeah.
And it was such a different experience than what I see a lot on the internet now. That's not to say that all homeschooling is also the same. I don't think it is. There are some people who homeschool their kids for reasons of like being able to provide more like disability support for their child at home
Yeah.
than they can at school. Those are very valid reasons. But I think that mixed in with that, there's also the like ballerina farm homeschooling that I think is like worth thinking about what is trying to be accomplished by pulling their children out of school in order to replicate some type of experience with those children. What is it they're trying to accomplish, that I think through their homeschooling, that I think is worth reflecting on. And even as I say this, I still have doubts about sending Mia, my 4-year-old, to public school because I don't know how to navigate the school system as a parent. I never went to school.
Interesting.
And I feel fearful about not knowing what I
Mm.
don't know, and also fearful about what will the carceral impact of schooling have on her, an experience I did not have. How will that impact her and who she becomes? And am I comfortable and okay with that? I think is really difficult.
Yeah.
Those are tough questions. I don't think there's like a one size fits all answer to those questions.
Yeah. So you have your daughter, Mia, and you are currently very pregnant. And I had to show Hannah the video on YouTube, apparently, of like the "Am I pregnant?" What did you think of the video I showed you?
It was very silly. I enjoyed it. I enjoyed seeing everybody's typos. I love a typo Like I just enjoy a series of examples of typos. They're funny.
Okay, I'm so glad. Okay. Anyway, so you're very pregnant right now.
Mhm.
And so I'm wondering how the process of pregnancy and raising girls has changed or shaped your relationship to feminism. So like for me, I'm raising a boy and that comes with its own like shit. So I try to be really mindful of raising him to be really aware of the social dynamics in our world, like his relative privilege existing as a boy. Um, I'm Latina, and so like he's Latino, but for all like intents and purposes in our world, my son is completely white passing. And so I'm trying to get him to think critically about the world, his place in it, and specifically like for a young man, the content he consumes online.
Mm.
So it's like it's summer, he's staying up until, like, God knows when, and I know he's on the phone with his friends playing Fortnite, whatever, but YouTube, right? So it's like a running joke in the house of, like, "Don't get radicalized on YouTube." Like, so, like, we have a different set of conversations than I imagine that you probably have with your daughter or, like, will have with your daughters one day. So, like, what are the maybe concerns isn't even what is your approach, your philosophy to raising feminist daughters?
Bold of you to assume I have like a cohesive philosophy about this. um I think I okay, so again, I'm thinking a lot about like conversations you and I have had previously about these things because I think like you're the person I talk to about this stuff. And so I'm like, okay,
Oh,
thinking
no.
back through our conversations and like things I have thought about. I think, I was more nervous about potentially having a cis boy than having girls. um, and this was also Logan was also more nervous about having boys than girls.
Interesting.
And
Why
so
do you think that is?
we talked about it. I think there's two parts of this. One is just that like he I think that there's a certain level of like I can articulate and talk about gender and I'm aware of my own gender in a way that um I can communicate openly about it in a way that I think he is more nervous about and would have felt more obligated to do if we had had a son. Like he would have felt like I need to take on the process of talking to a son about gender. Whereas I think now, and I don't, I say this in a neutral way. It's gonna sound like he's slacking off. He's not. But now I think he feels more comfortable deferring to me in terms of talking to Mia about gender. Um, like he feels like, oh, like this is Hannah's comfort zone. This is Hannah's terrain. Like she is a woman moving through the world as a woman and like is comfortable and pretty happy to let me sort of take the steering wheel in terms of like what my conversations with Mia are going to look like about that, how we do that. Not to say that I think he's very aware that he's also modeling like what to expect of men for her. And so I don't think he's like, "Oh, I've checked out. I don't care."
Yeah,
But
yeah.
I think he's I think less nervous in terms he trusts me and feels very comfortable with me being the one to have the explicit conversations with her about her gender. Um and I think she also is just more interested in having those conversations with me than with him. Not because she doesn't care what he thinks about stuff, but because she already knows that she and I are the same gender and that daddy is something different. Um, and so she is interested in she's, this is going to sound weird, but she is genuinely curious about his body and like how
Mhm.
it's similar and different from our bodies. But she's aware that like whatever gender is, mommy and I are similar and
Yeah.
daddy is the one that's different. And so sometimes that's very funny. Like like, having conversation with her, she's still young, and so she is still in the room with us when we change clothes, and having to have conversations with her about, like, we don't touch daddy's penis without his consent, in the same way that nobody should touch your labia without your consent, or your vulva. And I'm always really careful to teach her, like, the anatomical terms of her body and what they are. I didn't even know until I was in college where you actually pee out of when you have a vagina. And I was like, my goal for myself is for my child before the age of 10 to know which hole she pees out of. And is that a small goal? Yes, but it's still my goal. So even just like those anatomical elements that are, I don't want to say more self-explanatory for boys, but normalized in a way that we understand more about cisgender boy anatomy than we are of women.
In defense of cis boys, they can see where it's coming out of.
That's right. Some of it is literally being able to see down there. And you're so right for that, because you need a mirror or something to be able to, like, look down there with her. And we've literally done that. She and I have literally taken a mirror out and been like, here's what that is, here's what that is, like, I want you to know what this is. And so, like, we've done that. But it is really different from teaching a boy. I don't think there's a point in life where a boy doesn't know where he's peeing out of. And that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that.
Hashtag not all men.
It's a different life experience. And so it's a totally different, the challenges of bodily autonomy and ownership of her body are just a little bit different, I think, because of the physical differences.
Yeah.
And because there's so much gendered pressure around, like, saying no, setting boundaries, that was something that I set out really early, even when she was a toddler, to just think differently about tantrums, or, like, meltdowns, to be like, she is setting a boundary in this moment or expressing a feeling that, and while I can't, do the thing that she wants me to do, I can support and honor the feeling as inherently valid. And that distinction was really important to me from, like, a really early age with her, to be like, we can't always do everything that you want to do, but the feeling that you have around that is valid and understandable, and you're allowed to feel how you want to feel about it. And so, and similarly, trying to instill upon her that when I'm upset with her, she sometimes needs to do what I'm asking her to do. But if I get really frustrated, that's not always her fault. Like, sometimes it is. Sometimes she's intentionally doing something, and that should stop. But then there's other times where, like, I've had a bad day, or I'm feeling kind of grumpy, and, like, or we're hangry. This comes up a lot in our family because all three of us get very hangry. And I'll just be like, I'm sorry, like, I'm hangry right now, but that's not your fault. Like, and to sort of distinguish between, like, the feelings I'm experiencing and, like, her ownership of those feelings was really important to me, for both because I think every kid needs that, but also because I think girls especially need to hear that like, the feelings of the people around them are not their responsibility. And so I really wanted her to have these, be able to understand these, like, nuances between other people's feelings and her responsibility for those feelings. And hopefully that will just continue. I mean, I fear, the things I feel the most anxious about are, like, the playground, which, like, you and I have talked about before. She's hitting an age where, like, 5 and 6-year-old boys will just be, like, mean to her or rude to her for really no apparent reason on the playground. And, like, I really try to follow her lead in those moments. Like, sometimes she'll just be like, I just want to walk away. I want to do something else. I don't want to confront them about it. And I'm like, okay, I will follow your lead. I will not make a thing out of it if that's not what you want. But then there are other times where she'll be like, this does bother me and I do want to play with this. And then when that happens, like, I usually step in and set a boundary. And I think, like, she there will come a point where it will be really important for her to learn to do that for herself. She's only 4.
Yeah.
And so right now it feels really important to enforce and to reinforce that it's not okay for people to talk to her that way. Or, throw things. Sometimes they'll throw wood chips at her or whatever. Like, it's important to me to step in and say, it's not okay to do that. Like, it's
Mhm.
not okay. I'm sorry he's talking to you that way. He should not be doing that. Like, and I'll talk to her in that moment too. Like,
Yeah.
I can't control that little boy's behavior, but I can tell her it's not okay that he's doing that.
Yeah.
And I'm sorry that this is happening. And
One
what
of
would
me and
you like to do about it?
yeah, one of me and Ethan's favorite sayings is that we should normalize having beef with little kids.
I want so badly not to beef with other people's children on the playground because I don't want to be that parent.
I don't think that's your path though.
And also because I know that like sometimes kids just like do kid shit, and like there's two dynamics happening. Sometimes kids are just being kids, and sometimes kids are recreating behaviors or patterns they've seen from their adults.
Yeah.
And you don't always know which is which. And that's complicated, and I don't always like to assume things about people's caregivers based on their behavior, because God knows Mia has done things in public that I'm like, I don't want I don't want you to do that.
Hold on. Can you tell us one?
um I think the main one is like meltdowns at the grocery store. Who hasn't been there?
Yeah.
Like taking things, she used to be a real menace at the grocery store. And she would be sick and tired of being in the cart. So you'd put her on the floor and then she'd walk over. This was more like 2 and 3-year-old behavior, but she's kind of outgrown this. But she would just like start taking stuff off the shelf, as kids do. And then you have to go, no, put that back. And then if they don't listen to you, you have to go back in the cart if you're not going to listen. And then and then you put them back in the cart and then they're mad and they're screaming. So like that, very classic.
Also, that's not being a menace. That's just kids.
Yeah, it's very normal kid behavior. And
Yeah.
when I see other parents going through it, I'm like, I completely understand. I'm not judging you.
Yeah.
But
No.
it's hard when it's your kid. And you don't want them to do that, and you're like, you would never do this in any other place, but because I care, you can sense that I don't want you to do that here. You can pick up on it like you're like a mind reader, and then you zero in on the thing I don't want you to do and you do it. It's like, how do they know? And I think it comes from a place of like very normal like boundary testing. Like all of it I completely understand, but
Yeah.
it's like, if you could not, though, I understand it. Maybe just don't do it. But yeah, I feel like with other kids, it's tricky, like to figure out how to, you know, not not do anything that you shouldn't. That's overstepping your boundaries or influence in a particular
Yeah.
situation, while also reinforcing like, hey, it's actually not okay to talk to girls that way or other children that way in general. Don't do that. Um, and to make the park feel like a safe place for her also feels important to me. I just want her to have places where she feels safe and comfortable. And so that's something I think I actively struggle with. The things that have come very easily have been like clothing, and like self-expression type stuff is very fun. And so that part of it is also intentional, but there's just a lot
Yeah.
of joy involved in that. And she's someone who really enjoys, all pink and, you know, wants to paint her nails and like really enjoys the opportunities for self-expression. She went through a phase where we were coloring her hair a lot more. She's not as into that now. She went through a phase with temporary tattoos that she was also really into. So we did a lot of temporary tattoos.
Oh.
And so I really enjoy that kind of stuff. I think it's fun. And I love getting to like exist in a way that like I like being able to model for her the unconventional, the ways I flout gender norms, like while still being a cis woman. If she weren't a cis woman, that would be fine. I'm pretty sure she is. We're pretty much I don't think she has experienced much gender uncertainty. she's pretty comfortably a girl, and whenever I ask her about it, she really likes to be a girl. But it's important to me that she see that I sometimes have long hair and sometimes have short hair, that I have tattoos, that there's ways that I look different than we typically like expect girls to look. And that she too can figure out what she wants that to look like. And I love that she is so joyful about like her clothes and like her, even just like she is so happy about having a swimsuit with Minnie Mouse on it. And it's just like the little things, like she just gets so happy over like these, wearing all pink one day, or like having, being able to pick out what swimsuit she wants, or like those kinds of things that like it's fun to get to make those opportunity for like joy and exploration.
She's literally just a girl.
She's just a girl. Yeah. And I gender expression is like a lifelong thing that evolves and shifts with time. I don't think that it's like a stasis that once you achieve it, you stay there. So I'm sure
I've achieved my gender.
You've achieved gender. You're staying there forever. So I'm sure that the way that she expresses her gender will continue to evolve over time. But this like very high femme like stage that she's in is just really fun. Like I just really enjoy it. My stage, if I had one, was very short, and I did not stay there very long, and then immediately went to my brother's sweatpants. Then that's all I wanted to wear.
I'm literally trying to imagine that, and I can't. Like Hannah, yeah, like you being like extremely feminine, or like presenting very femininely.
I went through a stage where I was just like really into dresses and just wore dresses all the time. And so that's what I think of. I still wear dresses. But like I wouldn't say that I'm like super feminine. And I don't know that I was wearing dresses in like a super feminine way at 3 or 4. But then I went through a stage like immediately after where I then rejected all dresses. And my mom was like, everything we just bought for you is a dress. And now I don't know what to do. And so like if I went through that stage, it was like pretty short, probably only like a year. And so I'm curious to see, like, she's been this way for a long time. Been a long time in her years, I should say, like since she was like 2.5 or 3, and starting to like pick out her own clothes. And so I'm curious to see like if this is something she sticks with for the long haul, or like, goes through. I personally would really enjoy seeing her go through an emo stage, because I never had an emo stage. This seems deeply unlikely to me. I would not describe me or Logan as very emo people.
No.
But it would bring me a lot of amusement. So
and I think like one of the coolest things about watching children grow is just like seeing who they become and each of those stages. Like Ethan is 14, he's starting high school this year, and it is constantly just so cool. And just it, and like, oh, this is gonna sound so cheesy, but it's like when it's your kid and you're watching them, it's like, I love literally every single iteration of you. Every single one is such a joy to watch, and I'm just waiting with bated breath for what he decides to do next.
Yeah.
And it's just so fun.
I can't imagine being a parent and not being like really just so curious about your child and like where they're headed.
Yeah.
Like I'm just always like, I'm so intrigued to see what you're gonna do next. The only other thing, I want to say one more thing before we move on, but the only other thing that I've really had concern about is just being so aware that I'm raising a very white child. And I mean that both in the political sense and in the literal sense. So in the literal sense being that I worry a lot about her getting sunburned.
I was gonna make a sunscreen.
It's constant.
You got it.
It's constant. The other day I was talking to somebody and they were like, you always choose really modest swimsuits for your daughter, which weird thing to say. I was like, oh no, it's not a Yeah, I was like, it's not a modesty thing. It's a sunburn thing. I am haunted by the fear of my 4-year-old getting sunburned. And so she wears long sleeve swimsuit tops.
I'm
Not
sorry,
because I'm,
did a woman or
yeah,
a man say this to you?
it was another woman. It was another mother who
Yeah,
said
that
that to
doesn't
me.
surprise me at all.
Yeah.
Gender police.
Yes, exactly. And I don't know if she meant it like ironically, like to like a little bit sarcastically, or she was like making a joke, or it was serious. I couldn't tell. But I was like, "Oh no, I'm just afraid she's going to get roasted." Because for those of you who've never seen me who are listening to this podcast, I am very pale. And not only pale, I'm like the slightly pink all the time kind of pale. There's truly no melatonin under there. You can just see her blood vessels pale. Um, and so
You said
Mia is
melatonin.
there's oh Mel oh, wait. What's it?
Melanin.
Melanin, oh my god. Thank, Thank you. Oh man. You should leave that in actually.
As a treat.
Yeah. Yes, I have no melanin or very, very little. So I'm just like pink and pale. But I am also aware that she's, blonde. She's brown-eyed, not blue-eyed, but she's very white. and I want her to think really thoughtfully about um what it means to be white and how that shapes how she moves through the world, and how other people not being white shapes their experiences of the world. And so I think those are the things that I'm most nervous about, is like the areas where she has a lot of privilege, and thinking about like, okay, what does it mean to become more aware of that privilege? Whereas with gender, even though, understandably lots of people are fearful about the well-being of their daughters, I feel that there's less that feels scary to me about learning how to resist the structure of sexism in society, than it does to feel like you're accidentally or inadvertently replicating it by not doing something. Like with raising a daughter, I don't necessarily feel like, oh, I might accidentally passively enable her to reinforce the system. I think just by being the nature of being myself, I feel like I'm fundamentally resisting that system, and so she will learn that through our conversations, in the same way that like I learned a little bit of that from my mom, even though it wasn't as far as I will take it. Um, but I worry a lot more about like my, not interfering with what she learns about race. I feel like that requires I don't want to say heavier hand, but more intervention on my part. Whereas I feel like with gender, I feel more comfortable just listening to her gut and like going with that and being like, whatever feels right to you. If you don't want to, don't do it. If you do, then do. Those sorts of things. And I feel like with race, I feel a lot more like I need to do a lot more proactive, like, yeah, proactive work to help her be the kind of white person in the world that I think is someone I would be proud to put out into the universe.
Yeah, that makes sense. So obviously not all parenting or mothering is feminist. And I just keep thinking about that woman commenting
Yeah.
on her swimsuit.
Yeah, exactly.
But like when and I think you're modeling it so well of like how parenting can be and when it can be. So how can parents of all genders with children of all genders think about their parenthood and like the ways they are in relationship with their children that are feminist, even if that word is a little complicated for you?
Yeah. Yeah, if feminist in this sense really just means interrogating or questioning or challenging the like power structures that exist in our relationships, then I think that parenting can definitely be feminist, and hopefully should be. I think as much as possible. And I see this a lot in conversations about like gentle parenting, respectful parenting.
Mhm.
And like, I don't have any beef with those things, but I don't think that's not really what I'm aspiring to. Like, I'm really aspiring to like liberatory parenting. And I think what I
Yes.
mean by that is like treating our relationship as a collaboration. Like,
Mm.
here is my role. My role is to keep you safe. My role is to take care of your body, take care of your heart, take care of your mind, until you are ready to take on the responsibility of those things. And you as a co-collaborator in this relationship get to speak to what it feels like care to you. You get to voice your concerns, your preferences, your autonomy, and that's a conversation. It's not me enforcing a predetermined set of, okay, it even comes down to things like, I'm thinking about this a lot going into having another newborn. But with Mia, like, everybody says, oh, your newborn needs to sleep 12 to 14 hours a day, or whatever. And instead of being like, okay, she's going to sleep every 2 hours for this amount of time and I'm going to enforce that upon her, it was just going, she'll sleep when she's tired. She'll wake up when she's ready. I'll feed her when she's hungry. I'm just going to listen to her and follow her guidance as much as I possibly can. And I still had to do things she didn't like. I mean, God knows she didn't want to have her diaper changed. Those things, it was important to hold space for those feelings of also being like, we gotta wipe your butt or you're
Yeah.
gonna get a rash.
Yeah.
Um, but as much as possible, parenting for me is a collaborative relationship. It requires listening, responding, adapting. It's not a one directional thing. And I think that even in gentle parenting, I think I see, well, very well-meaning parents go, here's what we're going to do. I'm going to try and enforce it in a gentle way, but I'm still enforcing it upon you. It's just like I'm trying to enforce it in the like more gently in the hopes of a better outcome. But actually what I want to do is interrogate the enforcement to begin with. Like, what if parenthood is not, policing your child, but is actually like a mutually meaningful site of exploration and discovery about who this person is and what it looks like to be in relationship with them, the same way you would if you were meeting somebody you didn't know and getting to know them for the first time. And so what does it look like to practice that curiosity and questioning of what arbitrary rules and limits do we place on children that we as a society can do away with, that simply aren't furthering our goals. And so that's something that I think about a lot, that I really don't want to enforce anything that's not necessary in my relationships with my kids and other people's kids, all kids in general, which kind of speaks to the other element, which is just that I think truly feminist parenting has to end up devaluing the nuclear family. And I think that this is really complicated since a lot of this is structural, not just individual choices. The ways that we are forced into more work hours that we don't have control over, and that we have to a lot of times rely upon financial resources to develop our network of care. But really, the nuclear family with two parents, two caregivers and children is not actually, or one caregiver, if you're trying to replicate the nuclear family as a single parent, which is truly, I don't know how you do that, but like that, like it is not going to be a site of liberation for women or for their children.
Mm.
And so I think the future of feminist care has to be doing away with, or at the very least, just decentering the nuclear family in favor of mutually beneficial and supportive relationships with other people in your community, people who have kids, people who don't have kids, to create a network of care and support, not only for you as a caregiver, but also for your children. I am a really big believer in the fact that Mia needs supportive, meaningful relationships with other adults besides me. And I want her to have those relationships with her peers, but I really am important in terms of facilitating those adult relationships at this moment of our lives. And so I think a lot about facilitating the kinds of relationships with Mia, with other adults that I want her to have, that when, if she and I are experiencing a moment of conflict, or she needs another viewpoint, or she's working through something, I want her to have other people she can talk to. And I think that requires intentionally cultivating those kinds of things. And again, I feel so lucky that I grew up in a community that was really, truly a community. I had lots of adults in my life who I could talk to. And when I was a teenager, having other adults besides my parents to talk to about how I was feeling were just absolutely essential. They were so important. And so I want Mia to have those kinds of relationships for herself in the future too, which I think requires nurturing relationships outside of the nuclear family. I'm not going to be able to be all things to her, and I don't think I should be aspiring to do that. And so building a network of support is really, I think, vital for helping kids thrive.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I know there's one book titled, I'm pretty sure the title is Abolish the Nuclear Family, but are there other, and I know you've read that because we read it about the same time, but are there any other books or like
I'm gonna
people
get
you
it
would,
right now.
yeah, like I'm wondering who you would recommend, like one or two books for folks who are interested in thinking about parenting in a more liberatory way.
Yeah, I'm going to say very clearly that most parenting advice on the internet you should not listen to. Most of it's bad, or just reductive, even when it's well-meaning. But a couple people, I'm very selective about who I follow, whose content is like parenting or like motherhood. I really don't follow anybody whose brand is like being a mother, because it gives me the ick when people like make their internet presence about being a mother. That's a whole separate conversation, but like I just like have a sense of self outside of being a parent. Like I'm just not that interested in somebody whose whole identity is being a mother for the reasons that we've talked about. So the first book I want to highlight is Essential Labor: Mothering as Social Change by Angela Garbs. Phenomenal book, and I just love Angela. I mean, she's not that active on social media, but whenever she posts about what she's reading or what she's talking to her daughters about, she also has two daughters. And whenever she talks about them, I think they're like 10 and 8 now, or 9 and 7, somewhere in there. I like will go and buy the book she mentioned. She'll be like, here's what I use to talk to my kids about, to have a first conversation with my kids about how babies are made. I was like, great, I'm buying that book immediately. Like, I don't need another recommendation. If she says that it worked for her, I'm going to go and get it. In part because she's modeling the type of motherhood that I respect and want to emulate in my own life. And also because I know she's just thinking so deeply about these questions, in part because of this book. So yeah, Essential Labor by Angela Garbs, I really cannot recommend enough. She also has a book called Like a Mother, which is about pregnancy. Also a really great book. I didn't like it as much, in part just because I don't have as many like strong feelings about pregnancy as I do about motherhood, probably. But it was also a great book. But this was just truly phenomenal. I loved it, and I highly recommend it. It's the one that I will literally recommend to anyone. I also read a book. I don't think I have a hard copy of it. That was just called Revolutionary Mothering, from different women who all work in grassroots organizing, basically about like what it looked like for them to incorporate their children into their organizing work, which I really, really loved. Again, I'm not like an organizer, but I'm just really inspired by organizers. And a lot of the nonfiction that I read is written by organizers like Miriam Kaba. And I'm reading a book right now about Cop City in Atlanta, and the activism that they've been doing there to combat the Cop City being built. That has been really moving. But this collection of essays for revolutionary mothering were just mothers across the United States in different organizing groups and how they center children or center mothering in their work, because a lot of those spaces can be really exclusionary toward mothers or just simply not supporting of mothers, either because of the times that they meet or the lack of childcare offered. Things like that are real issues in activist and organizing spaces. And so the ways that they were incorporating their children was really inspiring to me. And again, just expanded my imagination of what's possible, what mothering can look like. And so that was really important to me. And also, I think it's just worth noting for people who don't have their own kids, because I feel really strongly about this too, that you do not need to have your own biological children to do the work of mothering. That some of the most supportive people in my relationship with Mia are people who do not have their own children and are not planning to have their own children, who are childless by choice. And those people serve incredibly important roles in the community supporting other people's kids. And I definitely don't believe that the only way you can participate in the important work of nurturing and raising liberatory relationships with children is by biologically having your own. I think some of the most liberatory relationships can happen between adults and other people's children, in terms of helping them imagine lifetimes and possibilities for kids who want to grow up and not have their own children and will need to see models of what that looks like. Or to see people in different types of work and calling. And I think that those things are really valuable. And I have the privilege of knowing really wonderful people who are childless by choice, who have gone out of their way to nurture and build relationships with other people's kids, that I think are just so valuable. So more of that. You don't have to have your own kids to love kids. And I think everybody should love kids, even if you don't have your own kids. And I think nurturing a love of children is part of the liberatory future we're moving toward.
I want to cry. That's so tender. It's so tender and loving, and I'm going to go squeeze Ethan real tight.
Yeah.
And I will try and remain in this headspace as I share an Airbnb with him and his best friend this weekend.
Yeah. Sharing an Airbnb with two 14-year-old boys is really brave.
Thank you.
You can hold both things in tandem, that 14-year-old boys are worthy of love and respect, also smell terrible. Because I remember my 14-year-old brother vividly. And those memories are not pleasant.
No. Yeah, it's going to be fine.
Yeah.
Hannah, thank you so much for your time and your wisdom.
Thank you for having me.
This was so fun.
So fun for me to come on and yap with you.